choices lie. Do we owe our allegiance to our government whose laws protect the wealth of the wealthy while putting the assets of everyone else at risk? Or do we owe our allegiance to ourselves and our families to protect everything we have worked our entire lives to save? This is a personal question and I will not attempt to answer that. However, if you do decide to move your assets north, I would encourage you to write the following letter in order to help change the current system for the rest of us. Dear Congressmen and Senators, I regretfully write to inform you that I am compelled to move my assets from J.P. Morgan Chase and all U.S. banks to the safety of the Canadian banking system. I am doing so to protect the assets I have worked my entire life to accumulate, as I can no longer count on you, the U.S. Congress, to do so. The Canadian banking system is the safest in the world, while the U.S. banking system ranks 40th. I have a responsibility to my family to protect our assets and act in their best interest. Should you, the U.S. Congress, choose to act in the best interest of we, the American people, I would be happy to return my life savings to our banks. Specifically, I ask that you, number 1, institute an updated version of the Glass-Steagall Act separating commercial and investment banks, effectively preventing them from gambling with my savings and retirement on Wall Street. Number 2, reduce the size of our largest banks to no more than a fixed and safe percentage of GDP in order to prevent further taxpayer bailouts of institutions deemed too big to fail. In other words, pass the Safe Banking Act. Number 3, heavily regulate derivatives trading. This form of finance offers nothing to society except risk and should not be allowed to continue unchanged. 4, create an independent Consumer Protection Safety Commission to ensure the safety of loan products sold to average Americans. 5, require banks to hold a large percentage of the loans they make to ensure the soundness of these transactions. And 6, require banks to increase their capital rates to improve their soundness so they can better weather serious downturns in the market without the need for taxpayer bailouts. Thank you for your consideration of my concerns. I hope you will act to increase the safety of the U.S. banking system so that I can bring my money home. Sincerely, your name, C.C. Jamie Dimon, President and CEO, J.P. Morgan Chase. Another thing we can do to shrink Wall Street banks is pull stocks and invest in the future. As I mentioned above, we are being held hostage by Wall Street banks because of the way in which our assets are entangled in theirs. As such, if a Wall Street bank goes down, they can take our savings, pension, and college funds with them. This has been the excuse for using taxpayer funds to bail out Wall Street in a crisis so they continue their risky behavior. Besides not feeding the beasts by using cash instead of credit, moving our money out of the largest banks and possibly out of the country, another way to protect our assets is to pull them out of Wall Street so that they are no longer being held hostage in the current gambling casino. Much of our pensions, college funds, 401ks, stocks are all hostage in this game of blackmail. If we pull our assets out of the stock market, we will likely have to pay penalties and fees. However, we will also free up assets that can be used for other purposes. This could allow us to use these assets to actively invest in creating a more secure future for ourselves and our families, one independent from Wall Street and sustainable over the long term. So this is where I need to put on my systems theory academic hat. And though it's outside the scope of the topic at hand, it is important that I take just a moment to expand our understanding of the problems we face to include a larger convergence of threats. First, as Simon Johnson describes, we have another looming economic crisis caused by the reckless behavior of these too-big-to-fail Wall Street banks. Another collapse on the heels of the current recession could well push our nation and the world economy into a global depression. In addition, we also have 2 other large crises we will soon be contending with. These are peak oil and climate change. For those of you who are unfamiliar, peak oil is the point at which we have extracted the peak amount of cheap fossil fuel beyond which oil starts becoming less available and more expensive. It's not the end of oil, it's the end of cheap oil that's easy to extract. According to research by the U.S. Department of Energy, we have passed the peak of peak oil production and are currently in a flat period of supply and demand. Supply will start falling behind demand sometime in 2012, reaching a decline of 4% a year by 2015. The DOE predicts that the supply of oil will drop by 63% in the next 20 years. The decline of cheap oil will have a dramatic impact on our lifestyles and which are now almost completely dependent upon cheap fossil fuel, as is our current economy. This includes the food we eat, the gas we put in our cars, the way we power our homes, and everything that we use in our day-to-day lives that is imported or transported beyond our hometowns. In addition, dealing with climate change and the increasing occurrence of extreme weather events will continue to call for greater changes in how we spend our resources and how we live our lives. What these convergences mean is that we are in for serious structural change in our economy and our way of life, whether we wanted them or not. And these changes may well be permanent. Unemployment will likely remain high as credit continues to constrict, while government spending will decrease to accommodate our growing debt. We will have less money, less credit, less oil, and less ability to import the things that we want and need to live. All this portends of an economic future that will likely be much more locally focused once importing goods becomes prohibitively expensive due to the end of cheap oil. So how does this relate to Wall Street banks and the need to shrink their size and power? Currently, they have captured our government, making it difficult for our leaders to take effective action to protect the nation from these looming threats. By using cash instead of credit, by moving our money out of Wall Street banks, we can prevent them from using our assets to grow and control our leaders. This could also help reduce the size and power to the point where it's easier for our representatives to do what is necessary to prepare and safeguard the nation. In addition, we should consider taking action to prepare ourselves for the future by becoming as self-sufficient as possible in how we live. By doing so, we can more easily survive any shock to our current system, whether economic, energy, or climate-related. One way to do that is to pull some of our assets out of Wall Street while we still have time and use them to invest in a more durable and independent future. Not only will this free our assets from being held hostage by Wall Street when the next economic collapse occurs, but by pulling some of them out of the stock market today, we can use these assets to help prepare ourselves for tomorrow. So how can we prepare for the future? First and foremost, it's important to evaluate the sustainability of our current lifestyles. In a world that may include less access to oil and money, how will we live? It might be a good idea to consciously reduce our overhead and consumption to a lower level so we simply need less money to survive. This in turn can liberate us from the overspending and debt that has fueled some of the massive growth of Wall Street banks. Not only will reducing our consumption provide less fuel for Wall Street's growth, it also provides more freedom from Wall Street debt. In addition, consuming and using less can mean working less to buy all that stuff, which in turn can provide us with an even more precious commodity than money. And that commodity is time. Time, as it turns out, is a critical component of happiness. We know from quantifiable research that humans, by and large, do not derive happiness from the accumulation of money or material goods. Income matters some, but beyond meeting basic needs, research has shown that more money does not equal greater happiness. According to Dr. Daniel Gilbert, a psychology professor at Harvard University, there is a societal conspiracy to keep people in the dark about the real source of happiness. Quote, if a society realized that money could not make people happy, the economy would grind to a halt. Research shows that happiness from the purchase of a big home, new car, the latest technology, or even an expensive vacation is usually short-lived. In addition, the downside is the stress of later paying for all these purchases that often greatly increase our debt and our indebtedness to large Wall Street banks. By contrast, here's what research says does increase happiness. Beyond meeting basic needs, greater happiness comes from strong human relationships, a sense of control over one's life, meaningful work, good health, basic economic security, trust in others, engaging in pleasurable activities, and all this takes time. Developing strong human relationships take time, as does engaging with your community, seeking meaningful work, and doing things you love. However, Americans actually work more than any other nation on earth, and not surprisingly, consume more than any other nation on earth. This leaves us with decidedly less time for the things that actually make us happy, but provides a whole lot of fuel for Wall Street banks in the form of our increased consumption